Hello, greetings. This is Dr. Jane Galloway. I'm having a bit of a funny voice today, so I wanted to say that up front. But it's a delight to welcome you to podcast number 5 on the Gateways, the Wisdom of 12-Step Spirituality. I wanted to kind of take a look at the overview of this Gateways process, this 12-step process, for all of you to understand what we're getting at here. Each one of these steps is designed to get us from someplace to someplace else. And, you know, when they're used within the context, of course, of people getting sober using these steps, it's to get from being a miserably unhappy, addicted person to being happy, joyous, and free. And believe it or not, it really does work. But it's not like a simple process. It's a complicated journey emotionally, but the steps are quite simple. And so the reason I really wanted to present them as the gateways is because while the steps are simple and amazingly effective for people recovering from addiction, they also are really a universal process toward reaching enlightenment. And this is the whole idea of the gateways, to provide you with tools so that you can really use them in your life, use them to move from one state to another state throughout your whole life, okay? So we all hit various different kinds of bottoms in our lives. And so that's, you know, it doesn't have to be the great big bottom hitting moment at the beginning. But yeah, so I thought I would just say what the idea of the overview of the gateways really is about. And this is going to be also a course that I'll be offering. And I think it's great for people both, as I said, within the 12-step programs and also people who just really want to go on a psycho-spiritual path that gives them myriad tools for freedom and a beautiful life of living in a spiritual way, okay? So using the gateways, the wisdom of 12-step spirituality, you initially, through the early steps, which we've already gone through in the earlier podcast, begin to identify where you're living in authenticity with your soul and where you're living out the story of the false self. So what does this mean? Well, a lot of us, for many, many reasons, a lot of them having to do with childhood issues, begin to center ourselves early on. And some of us, especially people who become addicted, end up creating entire compensatory personalities at times to please the people around them. What do you want to see? Who do you need me to be? And so we become great chameleons. The failure of that to continue working is really a big component in hitting bottom, because finally it becomes so much work to continue to dance to the tune of what you think the world wants you to be, that there is a moment, and it's a blessed moment really, where we say, you know what, enough is enough. And that's the beginning of this journey. I've often described it, I talk about this in the book, as, you know, we start out in life with a strong-rooted tree, and that tree begins to build a trunk and moves up, you know, to a certain place, and various things happen to us in this life, and because of these things, we start to react and respond in ways that aren't really authentic to our soul's journey. And so a limb begins to go off the side, to shoot off the side of that original trunk. And pretty soon, for those of us who have learned how to tap dance through an entire life, to the tune of what the world wants. And not only to the tune of what the world wants, really, but also to the tune of how do we keep from feeling the pain of childhood trauma. And this is really, I think, at the root of a tremendous amount of addiction and also just pain. So anyway, so we get out to the end of this limb, and there's a moment of awakening. And suddenly we find ourselves stone cold sober, whether that's actually or metaphorically, looking at this journey back down the limb to get back to who we really are. And that's the challenge of the early steps of working the 12-step program. Certainly, that's the challenge of steps 1 through 9. So you start inching down that limb, and you've heard the phrase out on a limb. We literally are pretty much out on a limb. So, okay. So identifying where you're living in authenticity with your soul and where you're living out the story of the false self. And then the second part of that journey has to do with really learning to recognize your essential self or your soul's voice. As you're releasing the false self, we always know, we always hear that voice of our soul calling us, right? So it's a matter of really deciding to listen to that, let that do the pulling, and beginning to relinquish some of the habits and personae and various ways of being that we've developed over the years to protect ourselves. These are all defense mechanisms, and they're all protective. And frankly, a lot of them really work well. I mean, if we didn't utilize some of these things in earlier parts in our lives, many times we would not have been safe. We wouldn't have been safe. So we've learned how to really play the game of checking out what other people want. And that stops working for us, and that's a good thing. That's really a good thing. So anyway, so I think up to and including step 5, we're really dealing with these first 2 parts of this kind of fourfold journey, and I'll talk more about the other parts of that journey in later podcasts. But right now, we're really dealing with that idea of identifying where you're living in authenticity with your soul and where you're living out the story of the false self. So the big question of steps 1 through 3 is, who am I? And that's really the whole question, right? It's a lifelong question. Who am I? And so many exercises, many programs of living and spiritual programs, therapeutic programs, etc., artistic pursuits have to do with trying to get at the nucleus of that. Who am I? Who am I really? Because here's what happens. When we're really living out of our real self, it's kind of like we're on the freeway or the highway behind a great big semi that is pulling us in the stream behind that truck, and suddenly our car is going very, very, very quickly, being pulled forward. And that's a big part of what it feels like when we actually finally get into the right groove of doing our authentic life and having our authentic voice. It's a challenge. It's really a challenge because often the world doesn't want to hear the authentic pain or authentic experience that we just. So this is where all of this inner work and inner courage really comes to bear. We have to begin to become strong enough to withstand people disapproving of something we think. There's a great phrase, Emerson, Ralph Waldo Emerson, really a wonderful philosopher and metaphysician, used to say, or part of the transcendentalist movement, he used to say, how do I know what I think until I hear what I have to say? And I love that. I think it's a great, sometimes we don't have any idea, but our soul is always calling us home. It's always calling us home. So And so the first part of this process is to really identify where you're living in authenticity, and then when we veer off into this false self or persona. And the second part of that is to learn to recognize your essential self or your soul's voice after the release of the false self, or as you're releasing the false self. Okay? So today we're looking at step 5, at gateway 5, and this is a 2-part process, steps 4 and 5. Last week we talked about gateway 4, which is correlating with step 4, which is really this is the deep diving, the beginning of the deep diving into this work. It's made a searching and fearless inventory of ourselves. And, I gave some instructions last week about how that goes. But we're really looking at resentments. We're looking at a lot of pain comes up, but we also really get to see our own part in all of these interactions that have been painful, all of them. And that's a great beginning. So step 5 goes along with step 4. And, step 4 isn't just a 5-minute process. I mean, that's something that can take a little while for people to do. Although I think it's a good idea to do it. If you decide to really actually do this inventory, I think it's a good idea to really try to do it in a few days. I mean, just knock it out, because sitting with all of this stuff sort of unprocessed can also be kind of difficult. But so then step 5 is shared with God, ourselves, and another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. So this is really, in the Catholic Church, there's a process of confession. And while I was not raised Catholic, I used to find it intriguing that you could go into a very private little place and talk to somebody and tell some things that were really burdening you and get perspective on them. And I guess you also got things to do, certain prayers to say, and et cetera. But, that idea of confessing, you may have heard the phrase, confession is good for the soul. I think we really need to get stuff that we're repressing and holding on to that is troubling us and making us feel bad about ourselves out. So however we do that, the process of confession opens it up. And actually, there are some very interesting studies about people's need to confess. There was a conceptual art project in New York City years and years ago. An artist put up in telephone booths, so you know how long ago it was, long enough ago that they existed, and a sign saying, if you have something to confess, please call this number. It will be, anonymous and blah, blah. He really just wanted to see, what the response would be. He was amazed because the line, I think he had 2 lines on it maybe, they were deluged, completely deluged with calls. People were calling to confess all kinds of things. And really out of that came the solving of a very terrible crime too, which I don't know how they got to that because it was an anonymous process. But people really have a need to get this stuff off their chest. And if you think of it in a holistic kind of way or a feng shui kind of way, this getting in there and doing the 4th step and really looking at these things that we're not happy about in our lives having to do with personal relationships, and then sharing that with another human being, is an unbelievably powerful step. And so people choose a trusted person to do this part of the process with. You can really find a priest or a minister. If you're in a 12-step program and have a sponsor you feel comfortable with and feel will really honor your confidentiality, that's a great context in which to do this. But it's really a process of sharing this. Now, the great thing about it is that the minute we begin to share these things, what we start noticing is that the person who's hearing the 5th step immediately said, oh, yeah, I did that too, or I had that happen too. And many of us think we're the only person in the world who's ever done or thought any of these things that we've been carrying around forever, right? So just being in a situation where we're able to actually open this conversation up with somebody who's actually taking us in and giving us feedback is unbelievably healing. So that's the step is step 5. The chakra and functions, et cetera, are all listed in the book. You know, it's so interesting because as we go up the body, we get to the various places where some of this stuff can be held and really be problematic in terms of health concerns at times too. So the functions are personal truth, expression, etheric energies, and the location is at the throat. The sacred geometric shape is the Om symbol. The color is blue, and musical notes G and G sharp. Blue agate, lace agate, and sodalite are 2 gemstones that you could possibly use for this process. And the meridian is the lung. This is really a powerful location. The meridian, the Chinese meridian is the lung, and the gland is the thyroid. And these 2 areas really control a lot of how people feel, you know, and function. And then the ritual, which I have come up with for this, I love. This is one of my favorite rituals. And it's a prism and light ritual, kind of showing us the properties of light. So step 5 has to do with understanding and assimilating what we've learned about ourselves through the process of inventory and then clearing out the thought forms that are part of a former self or the false self, as I said. To share with God and yourself turns out to be kind of basically the same process as God is in us. However, denial can be, you know, pretty powerful. Reminding ourselves about what we've admitted in step 4 is a great idea too. And as I've said, it's a very powerful process. So, okay, so let's look at the ritual for this particular gateway. And this is gateway 5 again. And the salient principle of this, or the essence, is clarity. Clarity. So achieving clarity. So we've gone inside and stirred up the pot. A lot of stuff comes up if we begin to work this 4th step. So again, it's important to do the foundation steps that come before it. So here's the ritual. Place upon your altar a white candle, a prism, and a mirror, and 1 small flower. Light the candle. Place the prism and small flower on the mirror. Meditate for several minutes or more on the principle of clarity, of perspective, and the perfection of nature. After several minutes, pick up the prism and catch the light of the candle in its angles. You will notice that the rainbow colors reflect through the prism. And then this is a great way to reflect upon the many properties of light, the many elements of light. Jesus taught that we are the light of the world. If that light is obscured, it can't reflect the colors that are contained within its essence. You are the light of the world. So this is one of my favorite steps and gateways. Close this ritual by giving thanks for a renewed clarity of vision and for the amazing process now as we go through, you know, the process of really confessing these things to another human being. And this is a process that can take, you know, quite a while. I mean, when I say quite a while, you want to do it with somebody who's kind of smart and tuned in so they can help you look at patterns so you're belaboring each particular person, each particular resentment. But it can take certainly several hours to complete it. So at the end of this prismatic light meditation and ritual are amazingly healing and open us up for the next 2 steps, which are transitional steps and have to do with a reflective way of being. So we're getting into this idea of light, reflecting and bringing forth that which is within us, And then next week, we're going to look at 6 and 7. And these are really about becoming entirely ready to have these, the AA literature calls these defects of character. What I think they are is compensatory tools. I really don't like this thing of looking at ourselves as defective. I think that I have never met anyone who is hiding from their true essential self, who doesn't feel great freedom and joy in the process of actually finding that that road back to who they really are. So I don't see it as defects of character, but I see it as really asking the higher power to remove these compensatory tools from us that have kept us from really being able to be the fullest expression of God's light, love, joy in this world we can possibly be. And so that's going to be the next 2 steps. So these are kind of sacred moments, really. This 4, 5, 6, 7 are, it's a deep process, and one that will be tremendously rewarding. So I wish all of you a wonderful week, and take a look at the gateways. The Wisdom of 12-Step Spirituality, you'll find this information about Gateway 5 and the ritual and everything starting on page 62 in the gateways. Also, I'd like to really recommend you go to sacredstoriesmedia.com and to iTunes, where you're going to find that channel and find not only my podcasts, but many other wonderful podcasts that are about topics that have to do with kind of similar topics, getting in touch with our soul's journey and connecting with many of the realms that exist around us and sometimes are hidden in plain sight. So sacredstoriesmedia.com on iTunes, Sacred Stories Publishing, and you can get the book on Amazon.com. My website is janegalloway.com. It's been a joy. Talk to you soon. Bye.